BSides San Antonio. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to our diamond sponsor, USAA, and of course St. Mary's for making this possible. We are also grateful for the support of Island. If you haven't seen our sponsors, they're all at the other center. Most of them are on the second. You can check them out there. I'm going to turn the mic over to JR Hernandez and Rob Kraus as they discuss automating all things. Please join me in welcome.
All right, welcome to the presentation today. Hopefully everybody's enjoying this nice, warm, balmy day in San Antonio, Texas. So let's face it, right? There's a lot of cool capabilities that are being put out on the forefront for businesses to use globally, right? Automation, AI has had a huge impact on the industry the last specifically 2 or 3 years. But there's also other capabilities that are out there to help put the power in what we're referring to as citizen coders' hands to be able to automate processes and workflows without having to have really a deep dive, 4-year degree or 10 years of coding experience or what have you, right? And those are through what we're referring to as low-code, no-code platforms, right? Let me ask you a quick question. So I'm going to ask some questions because I like to be interactive. So I'm not going to pick on anybody unless somebody doesn't volunteer. Then I'm going to pick somebody. That's why we brought Mark here today. Mark's going to answer all our questions. So who here's used Raspberry Pi before? Okay, cool. All right. Anybody have a lot of experience with Raspberry Pi or use it with their kids? Any projects with our kids or what have you? A couple of people? Okay, good. Is anybody familiar with Scratch? Whole lot of people. Okay, that makes the world a little bit easier for us to discuss during this presentation today. What's the cool thing about Scratch? Anybody want to give an answer? Why was Scratch developed, or why is Scratch such a cool tool to use?
You don't need to type anything.
What's that?
You don't need to type anything.
You don't need to type anything, right? So when I first started seeing low-code, no-code tools come out to the market, I started thinking, crap, I used to play, hack Minecraft APIs with my kid when he was 5 years old, and I was teaching him how to code by using tools called Scratch, right? Scratch is basically comes on Raspberry Pi. It's a drag and drop interface to where it's like, I want to do this. If this happens, then do that. It makes it very simple for kids. Well, that's kind of matriculated here into the business world with low-code, no-code platforms, but it's given the power to what we refer to as citizen coders, right? Everyday people, Bob in accounting, Sally in marketing, so on and so forth, to automate things by themselves, right? So what could possibly go wrong when you're asking, citizen coders to access enterprise data, customer data, and automate things, right? Let's wrap our heads around that a little bit. So I'm going to ask a couple questions real quick here. Okay, of course, that got cut off. How many people in the room have used workflow automation tools before? Okay, what platforms?
N8.
Okay, N8N?
Work.
Okay.
Signs.
Okay. I saw some other hands.
Yeah.
Okay. What about Power Automate? Right? Power Automate can be thought of as a low-code or no-code platform, right, as well, Microsoft, and what have you. So without getting too deep and personal, what kind of tasks are you guys using that for? Is it like processing data? Is it security operations?
So I have mine actually create my script every week for my podcast, so I don't have to actually do the show notes and all that sort of thing. So it's just ready to go. And I'll tweak it before I go live, but yeah, it's research is already done for me.
Yeah. I can't tell you on the N8N, I felt like starting my own podcast after I got done because I was like, holy crap, they automate the shit out of everything here. Sorry for little words. I spent 10 years in the United States Army, so I've learned my vocabulary not just in postgraduate education. So another question, just to get a little bit more personal here. How many folks here, or everybody here from Texas? How many out-of-towners do we have? Couple? Where are you guys from? Where? He's from Texas, yeah? No, he's Actually, it's true. Okay, I should have been more specific. How many people from out of Texas do we have? Houston? Okay, there you go. That was a trick question. Mental note for next time. So Mark was my old boss at Digital Defense, and he's like, yeah, we made the right decision getting rid of Rob years ago. So today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about overview of low-code, no-code. We're going to talk about the landscape. We're going to talk about some examples of low-code, no-code stuff, and then also security low-code infrastructure. We do have some demos that we're going to try to present today. We've also taken screen captures if Murphy's Law doesn't work out well for us here. So with that being said, Jair, if you want to
Hey guys, my name is Hernandez. I've been in security space for a long time. Mark actually hired me too. But yeah, so I'm very, very happy to be here. And I'm excited because there's a lot of stuff that is relevant to security related to the low code, no code stuff. It's very useful, but it's kind of like the security seesaw. The easier it is, the more insecure it is, right? So it's something that we have to keep in mind and be aware of as security professionals.
Cool. My name's Rob Kraus. Obviously, I've been talking here for a couple minutes. I started out in information security working at AT&T. I was on their initial UVerse rollout for the United States. I was on the security architecture team. Got hired over at Digital Defense, worked with Mark Bell and the folks over there for about 3.5, 4 years. Went to a company called Solutionary, which was MSSP based in the United States, got acquired by Nippon Telephone Telegraph out of Japan. I was the director of their Global Threat Intelligence Center. If you've ever read the Global Threat Intelligence Report, that I think it's 11th year of publication. I actually wrote the first 10, the first 9 of those reports in the threat intelligence space. And then it was also former VP of Offensive Cyber Operations at a company based out of Chicago. We're super excited to be here today. Let's talk first. What is low code, no code, right? And we're also going to talk about what challenges it solves. So, what is low code, no code? Low code, no code. Really, it's a large part of its appeal is that it allows you to automate things that you don't have to have programming knowledge for, right? If you're in the security space, if you've been in the security space for a while, you probably loved Perl for a while, and then you loved Ruby, and then you found out about Ruby on Rails, and then Metasploit moved their whole project from Perl to Ruby on Rails, and then you had Python starting kicking indoors and taking over in the security space, right? So you have all these cool coding and programming languages, and it's great to know all those. And you'll run across those in the security space, whether you're blue team, red team. But sometimes you just want to empower yourself and get stuff done in a couple minutes, and you don't want to sit down there and debug code and rewrite and sit there. And even with AI, with vibe coding, with things like Python and what have you, it gets a little bit frustrating sometimes, right?
One of the things about this and one of the big drivers is everybody knows that every enterprise is under, they don't have enough people, right? So the IT team's always kind of they're always busy, they don't have enough time. A lot of business functions require custom applications, and they just don't have the time to build that for them, right? And that's the big driver in stuff like this, is that the business needs are kind of they're allowing business needs to kind of do their own thing, which is good, but again, the security implications of that is something that we have to kind of contend with.
Yep. So what does that all mean, right? So we talked about Scratch earlier, right? And we talked about how easy it was, so easy a kid can do it, drag and drop little programs and mess around with Minecraft APIs and all that. But with N8N and different types of automation platforms that are out there, you kind of really have the power to say, you could literally sit down over a weekend, watch a couple Udemy videos and program entire applications in a matter of hours. I mean, with zero programming experience. And if you get stuck, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they will all build workflows for you. You can tell ChatGPT, give it the correct prompt to build me a workflow. I want to do X and I want to end up here, and it'll create the whole workflow for you. Now, I will say this, it does put a lot of default code in the workflow, so it's not going to work out of the box in many cases, super powerful. You can see where we're kind of going here. It allows citizen developers to really kind of get out there and build tools, workflows, integrations that they may not want to wait on dev on, right? How many times, who do we have, like, you know, I'm sure we've got people in the room that have said, hey, you know what, my job would be a lot easier if I can get just a couple hours of dev time to automate this process for me. And then that gets put into a backlog in Jira, and that Jira ticket keeps on moving further down the backlog. Like, yes, you'll have that feature in 2 years, right? Finally, when you get it. But it's something that you could do in a couple minutes, right? Like the example with the podcast stuff, right? You really want to spend time on your audience and building your audience and your craft and your message and your persona, right? It doesn't mean you have to sit there and write every single thing you're going to say, right? Get some prompts, get some ideas from AI or automation that you might not have thought of organically, right? So with that being said, some of the popular low-code, no-code providers. Listen, I could have made a slide deck with 40 slides with just logos on it. You know, when we were going through the research, there's several hundred different workflow, low-code, no-code providers and platforms out there. Some of them are free, some of them are open source. But, you know, so this isn't necessarily a recommendation for anyone in particular. I can tell you that a lot of our presentation today is focused on N8N and some Zapier stuff, but you can apply some of the things that we're going to talk about to almost any of these platforms, right? And we also put Salesforce and HubSpot up here because they also have workflow capabilities and for you the ability to build those workflows within their tools as well. So you could theoretically apply that information there as well. So the gap that it fills, we talked about backlog. You have faster ways to prototype, right? So let's say Mark is a super smart VP and he's like, hey, I really want this capability for our platform because I think it's going to enrich our data and be really cool for our customers, but I don't think dev actually gets it. So Mark can actually go out and prototype something what he wants to do and then turn that over to dev, and dev already has, like, they're going to say, okay, but they're still going to be able to see all the steps and the workflow and the logic, right? Behind that. So really shortcutting that time and being able to prototype, show developers what you're trying to accomplish if in the future it needs to be a more robust enterprise application. You could use it obviously for security teams. Is anybody in here that I asked already on blue teams using any kind of workflow for, okay, how do you use it?
Case management.
Case management?
Alert enrichment.
Alert enrichment. So like, you get an alert based off an IP address, and then you're going out and saying, oh, what does the IP abuse say? What does, you know, Shodan say? What does all this say? Perfect, right? That's an awesome blue team example, right? So on some of the sites that we talked about, like N8N, JR is going to show you here in a little bit, but they actually have specific categories for secure SecOps workflows, right? For blue team and red team stuff. So make sure you go check out some of those workflows that are already published by people that have created them and shared them. I'm going to have some cautions about that in a little bit, but I want you guys to use that as a source of inspiration, right? Because you could take some of those pre-done workflows, and even if you don't use their workflow, you can actually say, that sparked an idea. I can automate the crap out of this thing that takes me 5 hours a week and get it done, right? Why didn't I think of that? So one of the challenges with putting together this presentation is we have 5 or 6 demos. It was hard to cull that list down from the hundreds of different ideas that we had from a red team and a blue team perspective. So next, a couple of statistics, right? So there's a couple reports that we looked at. Some of these numbers, I agree with some of them. I don't know if I'm going to believe all the ones I see, but this is a report that was, these statistics came from a Forrester report called the Total Economic Impact Report. It's specifically for Microsoft Power Apps, and this was published in July of 2024. From Forrester's analysis and surveys that they conducted with customers, 89% of developers have used low-code in the past 12 months. 79% use low-code, no-code solutions. So there's a slight difference between low-code, no-code. It's kind of by name. No-code is literally you can build apps with no code whatsoever. But They also, or a lot of them also cross into low code where it gives you the option to craft and tweak things as you like. So based off of their analysis and report, they saw a 206% return on investment over 3 years based off of real data. And in some of the high impact use cases, they were finding that they were saving workers approximately 250 hours per year, right? So if you're looking at an average worker who works around what, 2,250, if I had to do some math in the back of my head real quick, ballpark per year, and that's not insignificant, right? That's a good 10% savings in time, right? So think about that for your personal workload, right? But also think that about for if you're a manager of a team or a director of a team, right? We're going to show some cool security stuff and some scary security stuff today, but the message we're trying to also give is we're not saying don't use any of these platforms, right? We're just saying use them, but be cautious when you are using them. So there's a prediction in a NTT data report that came out in 2023 that so there was going to be approximately a 20% continuous annual growth in revenue, right? Year over year, between 2021 and 2030, right? So 20% growth year over year is pretty significant, right? You multiply that by 10 years, that's a pretty significant increase. Looking at it being a $187 billion market by 2030. And then 50 to 80% of cost reduction in projects using low-code tools, right? So think about this, the business case for, do we pay a developer to develop all this stuff? US developers are, I'm not gonna lie, they're in many cases pretty expensive, right? When you're looking from a profit and loss perspective, we see a lot of outsourcing to overseas. We see a lot of different things where you can get development resources for less expensive, but in general in the US, since this is a US-based report, they're looking at a 50, 80% cost reduction in low-code, no-code tool usage. So, with that being said, JR is going to talk to you a little bit about why security teams should care.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the things, we talked a little bit already of like the security implications of this stuff, but the thing is that adoption rates are going to increase in enterprises for this stuff, right? It's just going to happen, right? Because it's easy, and with vibe coding, it's even less. You just kind of have a conversation with your chat, and then you kind of create these tools, and it does it for you. So this is going to be a reality in the future. There's no denying it, right? It's something that's going to happen. So this is the reason that you should care. Again, we're going to have an influx of new developers. Again, everybody knows the difference between an experienced developer and a person who's just starting out in the field. So we're going to have a lot of new folks that are getting into this space. And again, this is going to be based not on just, all people from all departments are going to be doing this stuff. So you have something that we have to contend with. When I was looking at this, it made me think of, you guys are familiar with the shift left movement where you want to move security more closer to the developer side. I think no code, low code is basically a shift right movement because we're moving towards the direction of there's already an application built and you kind of have to, secure it after the fact. Right, so the security is moving away from the initial parts, from the initial development part. You basically don't have a lot of the maturity that's been going on in the industry. No SL, no SL to LC, no CI CD, and a lot less logging in place, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the OWASP top 10 for low code. Okay, so another thing that's really interesting here is, again, you don't even have to build this stuff for yourself. You could just go download it, right? Go download a workflow, test it out, see if it works, modify it to your own content, which is great, except I kind of feel like it's kind of like the Android App Store, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of good stuff on there, but there's also bad ones too, like bad applications. So you have to be really careful because it's really, really easy, but you have to just be, cognizant of the fact. You don't want to download vulnerable or untrusted components and then put them into your environment, right?
So one attack path, real quick, I want to talk about, which we didn't do for this preso, but we talked about it, was, well, great, if I want to be, if we think about APT actors a couple of years ago, targeting different platforms and targeting MSSPs and all that kind of stuff, right? You go to the vendor directly, right? And use their own tools to distribute their attacks, malicious payloads, through patches, updates, all that kind of stuff. Well, one of the thoughts we had was, hey, well, we're writing some cool demos here. What if we upload, we didn't do this, but what if we upload a malicious file to an AN for somebody else to download? And then that AN workflow in it has a call out that takes your sensitive data that you think it's doing and then shifts it to an off-site, right, location. Makes copies of your data and sends it someplace else. So that's why I'm saying it's important to look at the workflows that are available, but you still kind of need to look at what's going underneath the hood because you're able to put JavaScript into some of these workflow nodes and have it do all sorts of crazy stuff, right? So use these sites to go check out and see what other people have done. But you can actually take the JSON workflows and upload those into ChatGPT or Claude and say, hey, do you see anything funny going on in there, right? I'm not saying just use AI to check your code. Don't use that as a takeaway from this course, or to believe it. But you should not just haphazardly download this, right? Back in digital defense, when JR and I worked there, we had a whole crap ton of tools that we used, but when we had new tools that came out, they had to go through our VRT to validate that there wasn't any malicious backdoor content in the tools and so on and so forth, right? So I would take the same type of approach with these workflows because some of them are interacting with your operating system directly, some of them are reaching out using third-party APIs, and you just got to be careful with kind of some of that stuff. So, but back to the original point I was trying to make there is there's a whole bunch of cool stuff to download. I was telling JR we should write a malicious one to upload it, see if he can download it and delete it. But then I was like, that might be pushed in a little bit. I did go through their security documentation and the published workflows. It goes through a approval process. I was thinking about submitting one to see what happens and what they say. Like, nice try, Rob, tried to put some shell code in there, but that didn't work. Or we caught it, but I would just be careful because they say they security vet everything that they publish with their 2,500 templates or 2,600 templates. But you don't know if those are security-minded folks that are reviewing those. They might review them just to make sure they work, right? So.
All right, so here's some stats, right? And again, I'm gonna go over a lot of more of the security risks on the next page, but basically, there has to be planning for this stuff. There has to be, currently there's like not a lot of integration with low-code, no-code, right, in the enterprise, so we have to kind of start thinking about that. And again, bringing it back to like the biggest thing, which is a lot more developers coming into our environments that are not exactly security focused, right? And again, there's like very little oversight as well, right? So you can have an HR department create an app that, creates some sort of form that has a lot of internal data. If that is not properly set up, that data could be going outside of your organization, and who is in charge of maintaining that and guarding that, right? Because again, a lot of the traditional solutions that we have in place do not account for this yet. All right, so this is the low-code, no-code. OWASP is very good at making top 10, lists, so they have their own for this. I suggest you guys go look it up. I'm gonna hit on some of the main things that I thought were really important here. Some of the things that kind of caught my interest, right? One of the use cases that we see that's very common is, let's say a developer makes a low-code, no-code application, they set it up and they share it with a bunch of people in the organization, right? What happens if that now all those people that have access to that application, they have essentially the permissions of the developer that created it, because he set it up with his own credentials or permissions, right? And he shared it with whoever. Now they have developer permissions as well for that application. So again, it's just privilege escalation by another name, right? And that's just one of the risks that we're going to see more and more, happen. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was that when you have a low-code, no-code solution that connects to a third party, right? There's a connection there. There's API credentials associated with that. Even if you delete the low-code, no-code application, that connection is still alive, right? And people might not be around with it, but like the credentials are still connecting to the third party. That all that data, like all that security issue is still relevant, right? It just nobody's kind of keeping track of those applications. Again, data leakage is going to be a big issue. These applications sending data outside without being monitored or having any sort of regulation to oversee that. Another big thing that we saw is that, again, you download these workflows, and if they're not properly secured, there could be a lot of security misconfigurations that you're bringing in because nobody's vetting these things. You do also run into a lot of traditional attacks, like injection attacks, right? You can have forms that are created, and if they're not properly sanitized, you're also having a lot of traditional developer problems as well. Just because it's a new platform doesn't mean that the risks are not there. And then again, the lack of logging and lack of traditional security measures that we have in place. So Rob and I did a little bit of comparing the low-code, no-code platforms with some of the traditional OWASP top 10. This is more related to the traditional OWASP top 10 where it measures more like web application vulnerabilities. And in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a lot of vulnerabilities that are affecting these newer platforms that are kind of like tied to the traditional OWASP top 10, and this kind of shows that, right? So we had a lot of cryptographic failures, not having proper encryption, insecure design, and like server-side request forgery as well. So again, a lot of the traditional attack vectors that we had, but are just kind of being mirrored and rejuvenated in these newer platforms. And we also kind of mapped a lot of the techniques that you could potentially use as a bad guy using these platforms, because keep in mind that APT groups are already using this because they realize that, again, nobody's really looking at this stuff as well as we should be. So they're using it to kind of create, do ransomware attacks, and doing a lot of traditional attacks, but they're just kind of doing them through the low-code, no-code platform. And you see here that, again, a valid account that you find on these workflows will allow you to gain access to a lot of data that you shouldn't probably have access to. You can also inject, one of the demos that I'm going to be doing later is injecting code into a current existing workflow and having it do whatever you want. Because it's basically just executing code on the server that's running it. And yeah. All right, do you want to do the first one?
Sure. Yeah. All right, cool. So, thank you, JR. A couple different things just to talk about before we jump into the live demos. There's just some assumptions to keep in mind. All of these demos that we're doing are just on our controlled environment, systems we own, nothing malicious against anybody else, right? I'm not going to sit here for 20 minutes and tell you that this is for research and do it, whatever, or maybe I just did. But so the demos, there's a couple live demos, so I ask for your forgiveness as we go through these. I do have screenshots for backups, but it might take us a minute just to bring up some of the screens and do some of the stuff. So while I'm preparing that, I'll have JR try to, field any questions that you have while we're swapping around here. So, so first, anybody here who's, how many red teamers we have here? How many blue teamers do we have? Red teamers, offensive, cybersecurity, blue teamers? Wow, okay. Pretty heavy blue audience here. So nuclei, familiar with nuclei? Who's familiar with Nessus? There you go. So nuclei is one of the newer kids on the block. It's put out by Project Discovery. This isn't an advertisement for the tool, but it is free. It doesn't have quite the mappage and covering that Nessus does, but if you look at a Venn diagram of the overlaps, it actually picks up a lot of stuff. It's very web app. Pen testing and bug bounty hunting friendly. So I just wanted to show here Nessus. I did a search for it, and it doesn't show up with an N8N discovery plugin specifically. It will find the web interface. But first thing we need to do when we're attacking N8N is we need to determine, is there one out there that I can attack? Now, a lot of the providers, Xavier, N8N, and what have you, have cloud hosted versions. They're fairly cheap. The starter model is like $20 a month, or I think even cheaper for some of the N8N models. So they have cloud versions, but for the sake of presentations and demos, we're using a Docker version and then also a natively installed Linux, Kali Linux version that we're running. But I wanted to talk about detection first, right? Because if you're pen testing or if you're searching your environment for like, hey, who's running workflow stuff, the editor actually runs in a web application interface, right? On a web interface, which we'll show you here in a couple of minutes. So Nuclei actually detects it as an N8N panel with a sign-in page. By default, it runs on port 5678. So some scanners won't pick it up because it's not like in a top 100 list, and that's just usually by default, we'll scan for top 100, top 1,000. They may or may not show up, but, so here's one. These are just me being cool. I wrote detection plugins and then realized that I already had one, so I wasted a bunch of time, so I just showed it for posterity. And it has some other issues to talk about here, but it's all likely because it's locally hosted. So for detection, nuclei, theoretically, you can detect it with any, you could write a netcat script, do a banner grab, and you don't have to go all crazy if you don't want to. There's another cool feature called N8N security audit. So one of the things I like about N8N is they actually took the time to build in an auditing tool into their platform, and they expose that via an API. They even have a node. When we show you the workflows, you can snap together little nodes to build your application. They even have a node on the cloud-hosted version that you can put in there that's an audit node. So the N8N audit basically just goes through a series of kind of standard security checks. Are there credentials that you have that you're using or not using? Are you using them safely? What types of database interaction concerns do we have? What type of file system concerns do we have? Nodes, like are the nodes I'm using of concern? And the overall instance, is it secured properly, so on and so forth. So it's actually not a bad tool. I don't want to say it's overly comprehensive, but pretty neat. So one thing to keep in mind is it's a tool, and tools change and break, right? So don't just run an N8N security audit and say, voila, I'm secure, because who knows how often they update that tool, right? So you should still include these things in your pen test. And just because you run the tool doesn't mean you should circumvent SDLC and all that kind of fun stuff, right? So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and switch over, and we're going to do the demo. I'm going to do another demo, and then we're going to switch over to JR. So JR, we want to see if they have questions or.
Before I answer any questions, one of the things that when we're doing this stuff, right, and again, one of the reasons I do presentations is to kind of learn, the best way to learn something is to teach it. And one of the things that I saw that was very common is that when you create webhooks, which is something that you kind of expose your server to, there's a function there to like curl the command from your third party and just put that in there, and it makes things a lot easier. However, there's a more secure way of doing that with platforms like N8N, which is basically encrypting your credentials or your API keys through the platform and then using that to make these webhook calls, right? Instead of just doing a curl command that'll like allow the API key to be sent in clear text or not to be stored securely. So keep that in mind, because even when I was doing the demos and stuff, I was like, oh, it's just so much easier just to just import the curl command and everything. Then but that's one of the big, we saw a guy that did a report on a bunch of workflows, and he saw that the webhook security was one of the biggest issues when setting up these workflows for platforms like N8N. Okay, sorry about that. That was just a side tangent.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of stuff when it comes to security about webhook security, API credentialing, how you're accessing data going in and out when it comes to N8N. So you got to think about it. JR pointed this out earlier. With the SDLC, you have all these steps where you have the project manager getting your requirements. You're going to talk about where the data is going to live. You're going to talk about where it's going to be secured. The challenge with these is when you click active, it's published. Like you just bypassed anything SDLC unless your organization has some sort of process to go through that. So the first thing I'm going to show you is just a simple tool called N8N security audit. So basically all I did is, because they don't expose the API for this version that I'm using, and they don't allow me to access the node, I just hacked around the system and basically said, well, screw it. I'm going to break one of the own security rules that it has about running code locally for the sake of just doing a quick security audit, because it's not a constantly running process. But there's a manual trigger set up here. It's going to run, it's going to call N8N audit, which outputs a JSON file. And then we have a little bit of magic, which I'll show you on a screenshot because I've made some updates, but we also map that to the LCNC from the OWASP to show categories. That's just an enrichment step, and then generate the HTML report and output the report to a file. So to execute this workflow, just click execute workflow. Hopefully we get all green boxes. There we go. Okay. So basically what happens here, for those that haven't really had a lot of experience with N8N or what have you, is you have a trigger node, which is based off an event that basically says you can click it. There's a webhook that gets triggered. Somebody submits a form, new user added to an Excel spreadsheet. And then that's the trigger. So then it collects data. All I said here was N8N audit, literally, that's the command. So you could replace this with netcat or whatever the hell you want to, right? It's an interactive command line shell. It does what we tell it to do, and then it comes back with mappings, and then it comes out to a report. It does some enrichment, cool stuff. We click on download report. We click up here, open file. Voila, there you go. Of course it's not. All right, anyway, you guys can see that, right, for the most part. So basically, it breaks down the audit report into finding summaries by different categories, credential risk report, and actually I have a screenshot of this, it'll show up a lot better, but credentials that you have configured that aren't used in any workflow or active workflows. I set up some dummy FTP credentials just to have some in there. And then it's going to show you things like risky nodes. Yep. Okay. All right, so risky nodes, here's something quick I want to talk about. So risky nodes is basically, the cool thing I like about this is that I've downloaded some other workflows. And basically, in the workflows, some of the other guys had used risky nodes. So these are nodes that even N8N is saying, hey, you might want to think twice about using this, right? So it's just a cool way for you to go in and inventory kind of what's in the back end. So. With that being said, I'm going to run into my second demo real quick because we got the 10-minute warning. And we're going to go back to the canvas. We're going to go to personal here. JR is going to do some tap dancing. So here's the simplest workflow I can show to show maybe how a simple data exfil might look with a bad guy living off the land inside your environment, or somebody messes with one of your webhooks, like JR is going to show you a little bit here with the injection. But contact webhook, sanitize contact, simulate, save to file. So this is just us saying, hey, user submitted something via a form. Marketing department's like, cool, we got a new person who wants to buy our product. It saves it to a file or saves it to a CRM, what have you, right? So if we execute the workflow, it's going to wait for me to do the actual call. Boy. And I'm going to just submit via curl some fake data. And then when you look at the file, it processed the file, and basically here's the output, saving it to a fake file, right? So it just went through the steps. I'm not going to walk through it just because we have a couple minutes left, but personal. So here's the malicious version, right? So same exact flow, except for we forked off a separate adapter and we called it CRM adapter, right? Hey, that sounds legit, right? We're just going to attach that to our CRM. Going to execute our workflow. We're going to make another call. Workflow started. We go back to the workflow, everything executed. Basically, what I configured this one was to reach out to a webhook externally just to prove that it's actually working. And it's now exfiltrated data instead of putting it into your CRM offsite, right? So here you go. And this is just a website, webhook.site, where you can test API calls and all that kind of stuff. So pretty simple. There's an exfil demo for you there. Any questions on that? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give JR a minute to set this up and see if I can answer any questions.
Okay, so Okay, so one of the things that Rob showed is that he added a malicious node to his workflow, right? One of the things that I wanted to see, this is kind of like what a node that you would download from online. It has like nodes and it has a lot of stuff. It's kind of hard to audit this stuff. So what I wanted to do was to kind of show how an attacker can actually inject stuff into a workflow without actually adding a whole new node, right? So I created a tool that does that. And then there's that. So these are all the nodes that are in there, and it kind of gives me like the nodes that I can kind of tamper with. The injectable and the little alarms are a request of Rob, because he said that would be easier for me to like show you guys. But like now, what this tool does also is like it can modify individual nodes that you want. It can also hide your code in any of them or in all of them, or randomly as well. So basically, it's a cool way to like hide yourself within a workflow without having to add a whole malicious node. And I'm going to do it in a more simplified version so you guys can kind of see the difference. So this is a more smaller one. I'm going to inject myself into execute command. It's just a typical command that you see there, right? And I already did this kind of work, kind of a long time, so I'm just going to show you guys how it works. But that script that I wrote, basically, you pick the name of that node, you run it again, and you can see, and you can obfuscate this a lot more, but it basically gives you a reverse shell back into whatever thing you want. And again, that's going to be really hard for like whoever's running these things, like to audit that, right? Because it's just, and you can obfuscate it even more. I just kind of made it easier for you guys to read. Okay, so that's kind of like my first demo again. I actually have it written out, but I think this is much more interesting. I'll just do the second one because we're running around all the time. So one of the things that I thought about with this, one of my old coworkers kind of brought this idea, and I decided to do it just for this presentation, is basically one of the things that you deal with phishing campaigns when you're targeting an individual is the amount of time that you take when you're researching, when you're trying to target an executive, for example, right? With these no-code, low-code solutions, I was able to basically, I'll just run it for you guys. You basically are able to do mass research on people and then create custom pretext based on just running this very simple workflow. And using like, I don't know. Who do you guys want to research? Who do we target? I don't know, just do Elon Musk, I guess. CEO of, what did you do?
Tesla.
I'm going to do SpaceX. Anyway, so I'm going to submit that. All right, so what this is going to do is going to actually, and with the newer models of Google, right, you can actually have it do deep research. So it's going to go online and like, wait, actually, I don't know if I have this connected to the internet. Sorry. Why isn't it working? So like, what these larger models do is they go out and do research for you and like, identify like the interests, the activities, the groups that this person is involved in. And we're using that data and then asking the same LLM to be like, hey, with all this new information about this person, create customized pretext for this phishing campaign, right? So theoretically, you could target a whole company of like users with their own individualized phishing email for them, right? Based on their interests, right? So let's see, it worked. Download it. All right, so now we have social engineering option 1. So this is, let's see what it came up with. And this is not even using like the higher end models because they're expensive, but it does a pretty good job, I guess. So let's see what it came up with. Immediate action required, security protocol update, and then it has one for him right there. That's pretty good. And then you have 3 options to choose from. Confidential, follow up on the AI collaboration opportunity. All right, that might pique his interest. And then another option would be new automation tools, improving efficiency and time management, right? So I don't know if these would be good for him. I did a bunch of other ones. So for example, I did one for Gina Ortiz, the new mayor, right? And it has like the subject line, infrastructure project submissions, security awareness training, which is a very common one, and an invitation to a leadership forum, right? So again, these are all pretexts that were custom for the individual, that were like, you guys saw it took like a couple seconds to generate, even with no internet for a little bit. So now these tools allow us to do a lot more custom attacks. It's like homing missile spear phishing, right? So I don't know. That was my demo start.
Cool. Yep. All right, so unfortunately I had the gift of gab this morning and I apologize for that. So we're going to rush the last 2 or 3 minutes, but I just want to show you some of the defensive considerations. We'll wrap up. And then if you have questions after, I hate shortcutting people time to ask questions. So if you see me and JR walking around today, or we can wait outside this forum for a little bit and chat with you as well, so. And so real quick, there's the output of the OS LMCN mapping that I talked about with the security audit report, and then another copy of that report. Here's the data exfil that I did. So all these slides should be available after the presentation. So this is just all the stuff I already did. ZapCreds is another cool tool. I don't have a lot of time to go into it, but a really good researcher wrote a tool that reaches out to Zapier. If you have an API account to Zapier and has Zapier account, he wrote a tool that you could query other Zapier users, and it'll show all the connections they have with their workflows to outside services, which is really cool if you find out your target for a social engineering attack is somebody who's using Zapier or one of these platforms, because you're like, oh, this guy has a connection to this and that and this and that. So pretty cool stuff. So ZapCreds, I definitely check that out. So securing the no-code future, practical application to security. Listen, there's a lot of obligatory stuff that's on here, like ensure you use proper OAuth practices, but some of the things more specific to end is really, use the audit report, make sure you're not using any dangerous node types. Like I said, there's also workflows available on the internet to download. People can also write individual nodes. So those nodes that have these different connectors to like HubSpot and ServiceNow and all that stuff, make sure that when you're downloading or using some nodes that are not the official nodes, that they're, you do some good security review there. And then on the slide, everything we talked about today will be on the resources slide as well with a lot of the videos. There's some really good videos by Michael Bargary, DEF CON 30 talk, where he talks about no code, low code as well. That's some really cool stuff. So anyway, that's it. Sorry, we're right on time, but we didn't leave the 5 minutes for Q&A, so we'll take some Q&A outside. Any quick questions we can answer while we're in here? No? Okay, all right, thanks everybody.